Hello. Welcome to Good Morning America.
These screws are just a tad. I know it's a little tight for two big boys.
Two big fellows.
What do I say? What do I normally say? Hello? Welcome? I haven't done this in a minute. Alright. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Gabe Alexander podcast with Gabe, of course, and my buddy Paul. I brought him in for a podcast because we always have great conversations, and I just wanted to record it. It's probably going to be a pretty long podcast, and we'll probably end up stopping and then just continuing our conversation. Like last night, this man came in at 1:30 in the morning, and we just were talking, had some drinks, sat outside, and next thing I know, it's 6 in the morning.
Yeah.
So, and we still have more to talk about. That's why we're recording this. But that's his little intro, and if you can see, I upgraded my set just a little bit. I got a Zen dog over here meditating and a little fake terrarium. So hopefully that adds some ambiance. But honestly, Paul,
Yeah.
What am I saying? I want, not now, of course, but eventually I'm going to have, nice microphones, like the DXLR cables. And I'm gonna have, have that radio voice. It's going to be so nice.
Oh, yeah, no, that nice little scruffiness where you just want to listen more.
Yeah, that would be really nice, but, I got to be consistent with it before I spend, $100+ on, one microphone, and then if I have somebody like you, if I only have the one, sure, we're working it here, but I want to have two for sure.
Right.
But they can't see it, but I got a rug under me now. Rugs are great. Anyway, like I was saying, we just wanted to talk about stuff because I think it's an interesting conversation. We always have great, history conversations, philosophy conversation. Paul knows way too much about it, and so there's probably just going to be long periods of time and we're both just talking and the other one's listening, but hope you guys enjoy. I think where we were going to start off is last night, or actually this morning, we were talking about morality in society and religion, because there's been a long kind of debate about can you have morality without religion, and on the surface level it seems like a stupid question in a way. Of course you can, but I grew up not going to church, not really being religious, and I know what's right from wrong. And I was just thinking about how our society, obviously we have societal morality of we don't want kids to starve, we don't want abusers, we're not out here killing people, right? But I was just thinking that our society was kind of built up. A lot of societies are built up around religion. Even in the past, a lot of the major cities were religious headquarters in a way. And I don't know, I think it's interesting kind of talking about it. And Paul, you were saying some interesting stuff about looking at nature and stuff. You remember what you were saying about that? Because you can go on about that, and then I had a point that I thought about earlier that I wanted to say for the podcast.
Yeah, I would say the biggest thing, or my biggest realization with religion, is that even without God, certain questions that are religious in nature, theological in nature, still dictate a massive part of our lives. In the sense that no matter what you do, I would say you have certain beliefs, certain ways that you view the world. So I guess a big one right now in a lot of debates in people's minds is the nature versus nurture argument, which in a way is a very theological concept because we can't ever know for sure. On the other hand, if you take the complete nurture point of view and you're a complete kind of constructivist, you don't really think people have an inherent essence in any way. Well, that's really going to shape how you think society should mold and create people, how we should educate them, the values we give them, why those values exist. Whereas if you're someone who's more of an essentialist, you're well, no, inherently people behave a certain way because maybe there is a human nature that exists inherently and that we bring that out, and that there's a certain way people should behave that is true to that nature. And there's valid arguments on both sides, but the key important thing, at least from a religious point of view, is that no matter whatever answer you have on that question dictates a lot of other thoughts you have downstream. And a lot more complicated thoughts really require you to kind of know where you stand on that issue in order for you to make sense of a lot of other things.
Mm-hmm. More specifically, this was a little off. That wasn't exactly what I was thinking about, but
okay.
No, you get it. Because that's a good point too. But you were talking about historically different, I guess, religious sects looked at nature for God. Yeah, I wanted to get into that a little bit more.
Okay. I really need to remember the Mongolian guy's name. So Islam for the majority of human history, from the collapse of Rome to the pre-Renaissance, was kind of the center of human learning. You had massive advancements in algebra, in geometry. Baghdad was a city of close to 1 million people with irrigation, running plumbing. They even had ice. That was for sale commercially for people to buy in the middle of the desert in an era way before refrigeration or even electricity. And one of these things was that Muslims viewed God before the Muslim invasions as a rational being. After the Muslim invasions, and you had the complete collapse of civilization, not just the collapse of government, but farming and irrigation systems that have existed for thousands of years were destroyed.
Because of the Mongols.
Because of the Mongols, or because people died and the people who had the knowledge to maintain those systems either fled or no longer existed, and just natural decay broke down everything that wasn't entirely burned down intentionally. But this led to a really big shift in Islamic school of thought, where God went from being a rational being to being an irrational being. And because of that, the way of looking at God and nature is that if you want to understand God, and God is a rational being, then by understanding nature and the natural world, I can come to have a better understanding of God. I have come to a better understanding of myself and where my place is in the universe. Well, if you take the approach that God is fundamentally irrational, then you can't really look for explanations in the physical world. It's going to be random. It's going to be arbitrary. You can do everything that you think you should do, and that still might not be right. And because of that, Islamic thought really much turned inward and became very much fascinated with trying to understand their spiritual texts. Well, that led to the decline in scientific reason, the want to explore and understand the natural world. At the same time, you have the results of Christian philosophers, Thomas Aquinas, and he kind of came to the conclusion that God was a rational being. And because of that, you saw the rise of the Catholic Church, who started pushing out things like the Jesuit schools, which eventually led to, England, for example, had a very important idea on trying to understand the natural world to understand God. And you had things like Isaac Newton and Sir Francis Bacon, and then you had the birth of the scientific method, which really changes how you look at the world. Because if you're coming from the idea that God is rational, the universe is rational, I may not know what's going to happen, but because it exists within a rational system, I can learn to recognize the patterns. I can learn to understand and kind of control nature, and I can develop and grow.
And the way I was thinking about it, because when you were telling me that, look to nature, if God is rational, look to nature to see. And that reminded me of the Jane Goodall, who did all the work with the apes. Yeah, it wasn't.
Yeah.
And very popular person, came out, studied them immensely, how well they work together and more like a community, yada yada yada. Apparently she falsified.
Really?
Oh yeah, okay. I heard this, and I also think I saw some headlines, articles about it, right? But apparently they were very ruthless, very chimpanzee culture is you've got your little family and squad, but if you come across somebody else, it's kind of on site, you fight to protect. And it's kind of brutal in a way. And I was just thinking about that, and just with our instincts, and most animals are probably going to be very self focused, right? I'm gonna hoard all my nuts, do this and that. And a big part of evolution for humans in general, and just progressing, is the sacrifice now, more later. You'll get more in return. I will share my meat that I hunted with everybody right now, and I'll call in my favorites, or I'll save up, so if there's a day where we don't hunt, right? So we kind of evolve past us. And I just thought that, where was I going with this? That nature, it doesn't really have morality, or the morality through God, and that when we started evolving and started placing our values on, helping the community, this and that, and I for some reason just think that religion is a big decider, or maybe cause, of what our moral values are. However, I think it's like a placeholder in a way. We're using religion to talk about our morality, but whether you believe in God or not, I think religion in general is a placeholder for moral values. Because if you believe in God or not, right, then religion wouldn't matter if religion doesn't exist. It's kind of like, you know how Marx, I think it was Marx, it was like, it's religion is
the opium of
the masses. It's kind of funny, but in a way I think like just morality and wise, like religion's a placeholder, and eventually I think we're going to derive our morality from something else, and maybe we've already adapted past that. Like religion was used to kind of give us a norm, and now we don't, morality speaking, now we don't need religion anymore, and our norm is just our norm, and that's how we can live in a society, because that society was kind of created through religious views. Or maybe there's something else that will replace it. Like I was trying to think, I was like, well, could existentialism kind of move into this? I was like, maybe, but it's not really about morality. It's more of like finding and purpose and doing your thing. I don't know if there's like morality really ties into existentialism, but I thought it was an interesting little path I was thinking down.
I think existentialism provides actually a lot of conflict points for morality. Definitely not on an individual basis, because I think in some of its purer forms and like stated purpose of existentialism is to explicitly allow individuals to form their own moral systems. On the other hand, as a way to form societal cohesion and societal moral systems that allow bigger social groups to not just function in the sense that they coexist, but to come together with common goals and to minimize in-group fighting.
Yeah.
I think the push for individualism, and let me just take a step back. It's individualism in a weird way. Because there's an individualism that somehow needs to reconcile a lot of times this idea that people are solely products of their environment, while also deeming that the way they view reality is instinctively, inherently only through that individual's relative perception. Which, in my mind, you have some conflict here where you're saying somehow that people are a product of everything around them, yet also the only thing that matters to what's around them is their own perceptions. Which just it doesn't seem to like work out well. And I also think an important part of religion, so existentialism, right? It kind of requires, at least in my mind, like the West, the Christian sort of world, the Judeo-Christian world.
Say that again? Existentialism involves, or is...
Well, it requires this assumption that is baked into the Judeo-Christian Western world, and that is the notion of the soul. And my view of the soul is that it is the thing that embodies what allows me to have will. It is the entity that experiences not just like visual and audio and sensory reality, but also emotional reality. It's the entity that actually experiences the love, the anger, the rage, right? A lot of things with the removal of God and religion has made that process entirely material. And in the process, in a purely material system, even if people don't want to consciously recognize it, or even if they like, not that they want to, even if they don't, I think there's a subconscious part of you that recognizes the obvious conclusion that if you're a purely material thing, your ability to make choices is limited. And with the inability to make choices, the inability to do otherwise, systems of morality require that ability to do otherwise. You kind of get what I'm saying?
Say it one more time. I think so. Yeah.
All right. So like, if you take like the completely like materialist worldview, in which human beings are I guess a different word. The mental is a result of the physical.
Okay.
Right. And if you take that to its like natural logical extreme, you find that the material is all caused by causality. And you therefore are a product of the house you grew up in, what others have done unto you. Because of those, what others have done unto you, you do unto others, and so on and so forth. Kind of like you drop a bouncy ball, it bounces, and it goes on its predestined. Well, predestined isn't the word, right? But it's causal path that it'll go on because all the other factors. It has no ability to change its own direction of its own accord. Right. What religion does, particularly like Christianity and Judaism and Islam to the extent, because they all have the same root in like the ancient books of Moses, like the first 4 books of the Bible, is that man has an aspect of divinity, right? We were made in the image of God. And I would say, I interpret that mainly to be is that we have a will. And that will is an absolute, like obviously like That's why people get addicted to things. That's why people struggle to wake up in the morning and say, this is what I'm going to do. And then to do those things that they want to do because they get distracted, they get angry. Like, you have a will, but it's not absolute. I think religion advocates for the strengthening of that will by providing something for it to be like cast into. Towards. Exactly.
Yeah. Which is actually a cool segue, because I did want to talk to you more about, because I know you had some points about the Sam Harris video I sent you about free will versus determinism and his take on why there isn't free will. Because that was a very convincing thing for me. But I know, I forget exactly what you said you had a question about, or kind of a place of conflict that you'd like to rebuttal against him. I don't know. I mean, I can pull, oh no, I can't pull up the text. It's on my phone, which I'm recording.
Yeah.
But
I think I remember actually.
Mm-hmm.
I was, because I watched this last week right when I got up bed, so I don't remember it perfectly. Mm-hmm. But my main question is, a lot of times my questions of self-awareness in my soul and like my ideas for how that's separate from the rest of my brain is that there seems to be all the ideas pop into my head without my own accord, right? Like, I'd just be laying on the couch someday and I'd be like, random memory of like hanging out with my friends at the pool.
Right.
Or I will think of an event and say something that's stupid at work, like an annoying customer, and I'm like, God, that guy was a dickhead. And I can't really help that. On the other hand, there seems to be some part of me that can be a sorting mechanism, right? I can kind of sort through, I can take apart those memories, I can go, okay, why did it pop in this head? Why do I feel the way I'm feeling about this? Is this the right emotion I should be feeling? And so that idea of a sorting mechanism that seems to be separate from the facts. I recognize that the thoughts pop into my head, yet those thoughts are still presented to something. Mm-hmm. That something being me. In the same sense, like, sure, there's those arguments you hear about, like, well, if you're dreaming and it seems exactly the same as reality, which one is the real reality? And I'm like, okay, that's fair. But regardless of both those states, be it the state only within my head or the actual state of being like the real world, there still seems to be that observer. There still seems to be me. So anything that I'm experiencing in the dream, the feelings in the dream, the sensations in the dream, it's still being experienced by something that seems to be separate from my perceived body in the dream and my real body in the real world. And that ability to sort, that ability to exert will, to overcome the thoughts that are put into your head. Like, so example, like I was a big swimmer. And I would love to try to swim like 75 yards underwater without taking a breath, or 100 yards underwater without taking a breath. And it'd be super difficult. And the hardest part was normally about halfway or 3/4 of the way there, is that like your lungs are screaming for air. Like your body's just doing this natural thing where it's like, hey mate, we need to breathe. Because like it's one of those things that you literally can't hold yourself underwater to drown. Like your body won't let you. You'll force yourself up to the top. But having to restrain that feeling for a moment. Having to like exert will over the natural impulses to do otherwise.
Which is, because that makes sense, but one of the big arguments that he had in the video was, why did you decide that day to try to swim that far underwater? Like, there was a thought process of, I've never done this before, or maybe, because I don't know, of I've never done this before, or I haven't done this in a while, I want to see if I can still do it, or I just want to do a challenge. Like, sure, you are kind of interrupting and forcing, I guess, your will, in a sense, all over the homeostasis, why do I not know this? Homeostasis.
Yeah.
Like, mechanisms of wanting to breathe. However, your thought process to do this and to stay underwater, that, he said, is most likely determined. Because there was a thought process that you went through that you feel like you decided to do this. If you go back in time, that thought process is still going to be the same. You're still going to bring up the same points, most likely, because we can't do this, but you're probably still going to bring up the same points, and you're probably going to feel like, well, we'll just say made the decision instead of saying feel like all the time, but you made that decision, but maybe making that decision was predetermined. And so it was like, and another point he had that I thought was really cool, and that related to one of the psychiatric videos that I was watching,
right,
was that Harris said, like, most of the time we don't choose to be angry in a reaction. Our emotions, like, if I'm talking to you, you say some extremely messed up stuff to me that really makes me angry.
Right.
Like, I didn't, like, anger just happens. And then as soon as it happens, our consciousness sees it, right? Mm-hmm. So that emotion, because he was trying to break it down to, like, the most basic stuff for his argument. That's going to happen. There's probably not another reality or another timeline where you say that and I don't get angry, because all of our experiences, as we know, build us up to who we are.
Right.
And another thing that I thought was interesting that kind of tied it in was I was watching the videos and excuse me and the psychiatrist was like, when you get angry, when you're feeling lonely, when you have these emotions, he said just sit with it. He said, imagine this in your head. Here's your consciousness, and it's viewing you, like in a movie theater. So just sit with those feelings. Understand. Yeah. Sit with those feelings. Look and be like, oh, right now I'm getting very angry. Like, he's trying to separate, like, the feelings from consciousness, because those kind of just arise either as defense mechanisms or something. Right. And so, I don't know, I just thought, because the cool exercise was, like, close your eyes, think of a movie, think of 3 movies, right? Or, you know, from 3 movies, pick one type of thing. And he was like, what did you pick? Why did you pick it? Did you think of the second movie before you switched to a third movie? Why did you switch? Because, like, literally, I did the same thing. I was like, oh, right now, Inception. Like, that's my movie. That's the one I'm going to pick. And then I was, like, thinking in my head, I was like, I also like Interstellar and Pulp Fiction. And I was like, man, Pulp Fiction was my favorite movie growing up. Not growing up, but just, like, in the past few years, like, since I saw it. Yeah. And I haven't watched it recently. And I was like, and I thought to myself, like, because that's, like, my OG favorite movie, I'm just going to switch last minute and go Pulp Fiction. Right? So I was like, Pulp Fiction. And I thought, like, I'm probably going to have that same process again. There's, like, sure, I chose Pulp Fiction because I felt like I hadn't seen it in a while and I owed it to itself. Right? So that's why I personally chose. But I think my choice was predetermined. Like, the thought process probably wouldn't change. And then he also, I'll let you go on in a minute, sorry.
No, it was interesting.
And another thing was, like, he talked about it. It was a pretty long exercise. And then he said, all right, did any of you guys think of The Wizard of Oz? Like, that's what you were talking about. He said, most likely not. And if you did, that's crazy. But just go along with it. Basically is what he said. He said, we all know The Wizard of Oz is a movie. He said, but do you ever see a scenario, like, if I put you back in time, that you would somehow think of The Wizard of Oz? Right. Like, and so, if you don't have the choice to choose The Wizard of Oz, what choice is there? Like, these are all just thinking and emotions. And there's always a reason that our choices come up, or our ideas of choices come up. And so, most likely through our thought process, while we feel like we have free will, the choices are determined. And I thought that was really interesting. Because I was like, yeah, that makes sense. I think of that too. Like, my thought process. Why did I choose chocolate ice cream today instead of vanilla? Like, there's probably a reason, right? Right. Even on the most basic stuff. I don't know. What do you think?
So I think there's an interesting game that people play with themselves. And I Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, I always find to be, like, kind of really interesting thought experiment, right?
So you have to explain that one to me.
You're going to have to explain. All right. So Dr. Jekyll is an esteemed biologist, an upstanding citizen. It's all based on it was a book and came out 19th century England, I want to say.
Okay.
And so during the day he's an esteemed. He is just a good, just like a doctor. He, like, does house visits, treats people, well respected. Well, he ends up experimenting on himself, and he makes an experiment that at night he turns into Mr. Hyde, where he becomes physically slightly different, but also, like, psychologically a whole different person. Becomes violent, becomes murderous, conniving, evil.
The Hulk origin story, basically.
Yeah, the Hulk is based off this. But there's an interesting part where he recognizes Dr. Jekyll that he cannot control Mr. Hyde. That being said, he can do things well, Jekyll, to make it more difficult for Mr. Hyde to commit damage. So he, like, locks himself in his house. He will, like, he physically restrains himself, so he can't, once he turns into Mr. Hyde, he can't do anything about it. In a similar way, I think in individual moments individuals sometimes are kind of stuck with the tools they have on hand. On the other hand, your ability to look into the future and reasonably make guesses and assumptions in a way allows you to train yourself in a way that you can't do in any possible moment, right? So you were a karate guy.
Yeah.
You're a very good competitor, international, right?
Gas me up.
Yeah, of course. So in any moment that you're actually in a fight, the actual thought process you take isn't very much a conscious one, right? It's very much you are reaction, and you have not to say program, but you have conditioned sense of responses to certain impulses you see. So a certain posture that the other person has, it means a vulnerability.
If I see an opening and we're close enough, I go like I'm analyzing the entire body, looking for any twitches, any tells, like yeah.
But there's no conscious thought that goes into that. Like there is, but it's not in the same way that you would go, oh, what should I make for lunch today?
Right. It's more like a heavily flow state in the moment, purely reactionary.
Right. But the thing is, the ability to do that at that state was a direct consequence of conscious action to spent training for those very moments. Right? Mm-hmm. So the previous Gabe had made conscious choices where he otherwise could have done other things with any moment of time. So maybe perhaps your individual thoughts on food may be a bit more disruptive, but more complex things require more than just a singular impulse to begin. There's a whole chain of impulses that you can construct.
Absolutely.
That don't come into play unless you are in those certain situations. So once you're within those situations, your ability to actually make choices is limited. On the other hand, the possibilities that you have to make for situations are made by your previous choices. And this, in a way, can just seem like a very big way of making a circular argument, going back to a further point to kind of push this down the line. Sam Harris's whole argument that, again, then you're still just saying those thoughts are previous.
And that's the thing.
But so then I would say the key point is that maybe on the case of food, like individual choices like that, perhaps not. Because I'm not really sitting in bed thinking, what should I eat tomorrow? What do I have? On the other hand, your ability to look reasonably enough into the future is that you can actually make reasonable decisions that if you do X, Y will happen. And then because it has not happened yet, you can actually make judgments on that. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Because there's certain true things, right? Like, should I drive 100 on a curve on a rainy day? No. Right, but you see what I'm trying to say?
Kind of. No, I get your point, and it's a valid point. However, I still think, and I'll explain a little bit more in a second, that my decision to train for those situations, like if you put me back, that's probably always going to happen. Like I'm always going to train for the fight. But then let me preface to you and to anybody who's still around and listening, I understand about myself that if I hear a great argument, I am, in a way, easily persuaded by sound arguments. So I listened to a video about why we don't have free will and why we do have determinism. Now, if I go watch a video that rebuttals it, that says we do have free will, not determinism, I'm probably going to hop right back over. What I like in the way that I best formulate my own process is watching a debate. Because it's in real time, both sides are directly rebuttaling. It's not like...
And if it's a good one, they're both honestly... Beyond just respectful, but they're both honestly trying to build up their best possible case and bring the best assailments to the opposition's case.
They're not straw manning.
Exactly. It's an honest exercise, which doesn't always mean respectful, but at least that intellectual honesty is the most important part.
So that's why, right now, I might seem like, oh yeah, I'm a hardcore determinist, but this and that. But I just thought that was very interesting, so I wanted to talk about it. But I think that would lead me, in the case of morality, how would, hypothetically, us living in a deterministic society, or just philosophy, right? Mm-hmm. If we somehow figured that out, how do you think views on morality would change?
You know what I'm going to bring up, right?
Maybe.
All right. So I'm not a big anime guy, but I do have quite a few that I like. Psychopaths. And Psychopaths, real quick little side thing. Mm-hmm. So it takes place in a futuristic Neo Tokyo.
Yeah.
And in a lot of ways, it's the idealized form of the Chinese social credit system, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And so in this future, they have invented a way, think of like super MRIs, where you can read and we have completely mapped what the electrical impulses of the brain actually correlate to into physical actions.
Mm-hmm. So you can tell if somebody's going to do something harmful or if they're predisposed to do
Yeah,
something harmful.
it's what was that stupid Tom Cruise Minority Report? It's like Minority Report, but it doesn't use the magic of peering into the future. It's just saying, well, this person is having the exact same brain chemistry and brain reactions as someone before they commit a murder, so it's reasonable to think that they are going to murder that person.
So we have to arrest them before they can do it.
And then we have to treat them in order to make them more suitable.
Subdued or something.
One of the big parts of morality in this system is that, in the main crux of the show, because it follows like these detectives.
I've watched like 4 episodes. But
Right.
Yeah.
Is that the main people who are part of the state government, right? Their job really as investigators is not to investigate the crime, but to moderate these people who are latent criminals, who society already recognizes have the capability to commit crimes, so they can actually track the people down. So they actually track the criminals down, because in order to track the criminal, it requires you in some form or fashion to think like them. You have to be able to inhabit the same sort of state of mind that they are, so you can make sense of their choices and make reasonable predictions on what they're thinking. And so you run into the system of morality, though, where you have a lot of people, like this one of the characters in the show, who as a child, before committing any crime, was already said, oh, yeah, no, you just have a certain physical condition that will make you a latent criminal, and this is your life for all of it. And the system has this weird conflict where the system works. Society is really well, it's really peaceful, the vast majority of people find jobs, they feel fulfilled, there is no such thing as locking your door and needing to learn how to defend yourself. People can still choose to do that, but there's never any fear that it will be required to be used in defense of yourself, because that whole thing has been wiped out. That has allowed for a very great society to form. On the other hand, you run to the thing, if everyone is behaving as they should and adherent to a system, can you really claim any of the decisions they're making are moral? Because there's no actual... There is no otherwise. They're not inhabiting virtues because they are virtuous. They're inhabiting virtues because they are unable to do otherwise.
Yeah. But how were you going to relate that back into how our view on morality would be if everything... Like, not if society forced morality onto us, in a way, and, like, their, like, latent criminal status was based on, like, societal standards. But how do you think, like, for example, say we live in a deterministic universe.
Right.
There are still things that people do that our society deems immoral.
Yeah.
If they essentially don't have a choice...
Is it really moral?
How do you think... Good point. But how do you think... That would be a conversation to be had. But I think, let's say right now... how would you think... Do you think people would... Do you think morality would collapse because so many people would try to advocate for, you know, they didn't do anything, it's not their fault, this and that? Or do you think our morality standards would still be high, and if you people somebody, we're going to throw you in jail. If you do have some heinous stuff, we're going to kill you? Like, how do you think?
So
I think now it might change towards let's forgive everybody, la-di-da.
Well, I would say I don't need to offer my opinion on this. I don't mean this to start up a political conversation. So in our criminal justice system, there's two main schools of thought, particularly when it comes to punishment. Should punishment be retributive, or should punishment seek to rehabilitate? If you come from the materialist, consequentialist, causal point of view of humanity, you view people did bad things or immoral things because of consequence of something in their environment. Therefore, society's obligation should not to be to punish these individuals, right? It should be to rehabilitate them, to make them better, because we think the only reason why they did something wrong is because of other factors in their environment. So to answer your question, I think as a society, the point of view that comes from a purely causal universe and pure causality for man is ready to lead us down that path as a society. in which we say we can forgive any act because we view the reasons why you committed that act to not be laid at the feet of the individual who actually committed it, but more on the feet of a broader system that might have failed him or her throughout their lives.
That's interesting, because I like, in a sense, overall, I kind of agree with you, and just like rehabilitation in general. But even in my hypothetical, there are just some things you can't forgive.
No, there's not.
Opinion. And so, like, I don't want to rehabilitate somebody who abused, in any number of ways, a child.
Right.
Regardless of if that was their set path or not. Which is, like, hard to say. Like, I'm saying that, and it kind of irks me in a way, you know? But, like...
Well, then you throw in the fact that the majority of people who abuse children were... like more likely than not, overwhelmingly likely to also have been abused children themselves.
Now this is getting into, I'm kind of pivoting a little bit.
Yeah.
This is getting into the hypothetical of how do you rehabilitate child predators? I think from what I heard on a discussion one time, I didn't look this up myself, but I heard it. In Japan, they do try to rehabilitate child predators. And the way they do that, in some cases, is supplying them with child material, not like people,
like pornography
videos. Yeah, and apparently they have to, because it was actually mentioned in an ethical debate, but they have to obviously to show these things. They're not obviously recording new things. It's like stuff that's already there that they have the permission from the person who was abused to view it. And then the guy was like, okay, this, like, sure, you want to have their position, this and that, but he's like, is it even ethical to like put them back in that situation? Like, here is like this video that has ruined your childhood and your mentality. Can we show it to people in hopes that they kind of get over it? In a way. And it was like, he's like, how is that ethical?
It's
like,
not.
like,
well, so all right, so then.
But yeah, I'm going off topic a little bit, but.
So I guess going back to the thing that we're saying, right? And this also comes back to how we open on religion, right? Immanuel Kant, he had his system of ethics called deontology, and it's really annoying because there are some things that seem to be deontological, which is to say that they are wrong regardless of your justification why, right? So he would say lying, for example, no matter what is wrong, and if it is wrong, you should not do it. Well, then you run into the classic argument against anyone who's a deontological, and that is, so say you live in 1940s Poland, and a SS officer comes to the door and knocks on the door and says, do you have any Jews that you are hiding? Kant would say it is morally wrong to lie and say, no, I do not, when you do.
If you are harboring, yeah.
And something about that seems so inherently wrong to even like the most layman, someone who doesn't really spend time thinking about ethics. On the other hand, though, there seems to be things that are very deontological. Is there ever a situation where it's justifiable to abuse children? No. Like, should people be able to be forgiven for that? You're like,
I don't want to. I'm not going to make that choice because I couldn't.
Right. But then the point is, when you have a systems in place as we do that primarily views people as product of their environments and primary cause of things where they're not necessarily in charge of their own thoughts, then you really do not have any ethical justification to punish anyone for anything. And on the other hand, and it seems so amazingly true that can't entirely be true, because as a person, right, I've never murdered or abused anyone.
Thank you for letting us know.
On the other hand, have there been times where I've been a dickhead and I'm aware I'm being a dickhead and I'm doing it just because I want the other person to feel bad even though I know it's wrong? Yes. Do I recognize that's not what I should do? Yes. Do I still do it anyways? Yes. And in those situations, there been times where I've been hit, or there's been an exchange of words. I'm like, that really hurt. I'm like, I had that coming. And you're like, that doesn't seem to mold. Like, the only way that can make sense is in the fact that I take the recollection that I chose to do that. I knew I shouldn't have, but I did so anyways. And if we're willing to extend that to, like, very small, minute things, like interactions between peers and friends, it would seem strange to me to obfuscate that same line of reasoning when we extend it to demonstrably more heinous acts, such as like murder or theft or rape or any number of things where there's an effort to try to prescribe rehabilitation, because rehabilitation implies implicitly, the word means the same thing twice, implicitly means
implies implicitly. I didn't catch that. You could have been going, but
like it's implicit the fact that the person did that not of their own accord, right. And you're just like, but that's a big religious thing, because those are two. They require you to view the universe fundamentally differently, and you either view it as people are free for their actions and therefore they're responsible for what they've done, and if people are responsible for what they've done, then it makes sense to punish people for doing the wrong thing, or we view people aren't really free to choose what they do, so you shouldn't really punish them. You should try to make them better in whichever moral or ethical framework that leads you to.
Which is kind of interesting, because I think I'm on topic with you, but I'm gonna switch up optics just a little bit, because
it's also came to very related subjects.
Yeah. But I honestly, pause from the conversation. My worry is that, like, we're making all these pivots, and the people watching are like, man, they didn't finish that point or something. But I think we're all in the same realm.
Oh yeah.
But anyway, talking about people are product of their decisions, I kind of just came to me that, say we are in a deterministic universe.
Oh, I think we are.
Yeah.
Right.
And we should still hold people responsible for their actions, even if it's like, well, he only murdered that. It's a little cheesy, but like, he only murdered that person because it's a determinism world. He couldn't have changed. Why are you punishing him? Or like, why are you trying to do this? But then you have to think, okay, for the sake of simple arguments, it's not your fault, right? We're going to say that. So why am I punishing him? Why am I taking him off the streets? Why are we, like, executing certain people?
Right.
Because if we allow that to be okay, they're most likely going to have a negative impact on somebody, and their kid, therefore, who lives in a deterministic society, is going to be in a worse position and maybe perpetuate that. Right? So it's not like society's going to be fine, our morality's still in check, we're going to rehabilitate everybody. Not punishing types of crime in a deterministic world would lead to collapse.
Right, but then you calls into question, if you're in a deterministic world, what input do you actually have on the system in which society has to punish people?
You're good.
Right.
Good.
So and again,
because I asked how we would react, but if we're living in a deterministic universe,
right,
it's already determined how we would react.
And so,
okay, interesting.
And again, going back to the whole how we started again with religion. This whole thing, the whole point. So Kierkegaard, Soren Kierkegaard, he was a Danish philosopher. One of the first existentialists. You would probably actually like a lot of his work, because he was an existentialist, and he was also a Christian philosopher. And his existentialism really has been run and like gone very far. And in fact, a lot of the origins for like queer theory and feminist theory, they actually bite a lot of Kierkegaard's existentialism. I can't speak so much on that. I'm not super familiar with it, but is one of his most famous concepts is this idea of leap of faith. And that is, when it comes to particularly God, and as extension of God, I would say the most important extension of believing in God is believing in the soul, is that it doesn't make sense, my guy. Like, there is no real valid, like, scientific in the sense. Like, there is no measurable, quantifiable way that I can measure your will. On the other hand, you just kind of have to take that blind leap of faith, that step into the abyss, and find the ground that is there, and to continue to grow in it. So when in every conceivable way, and this was a realization that happened as soon as Newton figured out and had to like put down his laws of motion. Every action is opposite equal reaction. So the universe is a closed system. Doesn't really matter what started. Once it started, we're all within the closed system. The system is going to carry on its pattern that it is not predetermined to, but unless acted upon an outside force, will continue in the trend of.
Right.
And that very notion, you're like, oh fuck, I'm a human being. I exist within the universe. So you almost need to have the ability to go, well, yes, I am also not. And even though you can't really explain that physically, like obviously I think like experientially, like just the way you even phrase that question, like what should we do as a society in a determinist world? Like how should we do that? Because that it's just inherently the way you perceive the universe and the way you perceive thoughts is that you perceive yourself as somehow separate from it, or at least some part of you separate from the material.
Well, it might not be the realistic case. Our consciousness or soul does view it that way.
Well, right, because it couldn't function in any other way. Yeah. So there doesn't seem to be a scientific argument in the sense of like scientific laws and mathematically proven formulas. On the other hand, if it doesn't behave in some sort of fashion where I have will to do otherwise, functionally it doesn't work. And then I guess you have two schools of thought. You can have the people who kind of go, well, you can just accept that's an illusion and pretend with it. Or you have, I guess, the more religious theistic responses be like, no, I believe in God. It doesn't have to be like the Judeo-Christian one or even all that. But like, I have a soul and I have free will. And you could make the argument that they're both interchangeable. I would say the first one literally is, I think, a big reason why so many people are depressed, because you can't just tell yourself to believe something that you recognize as being a lie, right? Whereas the other approach says I need to accept something that I don't fully understand, but I can hold it to be true. The other one tells you to embrace the thing you know can't be true, which I think it's a small distinction, but it's one of those small decisions that has a lot of consequences to your broader view of life and how everything interacts with each other.
Interesting. Yeah. I don't know if there will ever be an answer, but it's a good thought experiment.
Oh, it's super fun.
It's always good. Like, yeah, it's just so... I like this, like, exploring, I don't know, morality. Like, I was telling Paul earlier that... well, this little morality topic and kind of religious, spiritual topic came from the fact that, like, because I thought the question that I posed to you guys at the beginning of, like, how has religion affected societal morality? Like, if a different religion was more popular, that was, like, nothing like we've seen before. It's a religion of stark individualism, like, get ahead, Machiavellianism. Somehow that became a very popular religion. Like, that would influence all the societies and how they would grow, and then, you know, it might put us on a whole different path. But I would love to, if I have the time and the will to, like, read about how society has evolved from way back and the influence and evolution of religion, and see how they kind of affect each other and see if there's something there. Because there probably isn't. I could probably just watch a YouTube video about it, but I'd also like to read about
it. In that vein, actually, this is something I learned a couple weeks ago from a YouTube video it was on history overall, but more like the Catholic Church. And there are certain things, like not all decisions and policies are created equal, right? Because some are way more impactful than others because they redefine the ground we stand on. One of the ones that the Catholic Church did that I had never thought about, because the system that they created because of the decision is one that we've all grown up in for hundreds of years. What they did is that Dark Age or Middle Ages Europe was very much a clan-based area, right? So you had towns that were really just a mix from like first to fourth cousins. It was very common to have marriage in between families to maintain the clan. Okay. What the church did is that they stopped recognizing clans and started recognizing individuals and therefore their families. So instead of being like the patriarch of my family being my second uncle, right, and then therefore I am viewed through the lens of belonging to my second uncle and as a member of this clan, the church is like, no, you're your own individual. And that little distinction led to the kind of ending of giant clan base, like the family crests and all those kind of went away. Obviously still exists for the European aristocracy, but for the common peasant to like middle class individual throughout Europe, they're like, no, wait, I don't need to be determined by my family. I'm going to, and it wasn't even a big thing. It was just how the church started addressing people. They went from addressing the clans to addressing the individual. I forgot where the hell I was going with that. Oh no, you're talking about the history of religion.
Yeah, history.
So is like on a whole thing, right? the way that the church just decided to view individuals was a big push that kind of moved Europe out of the feudal system into the modern era, into like you had the Renaissance, you also had the Dutch Renaissance, and particularly the Dutch and like North German Renaissance was really pushed by the Pope making this decision to recognize individuals, giving people more freedom and like breadth to make their own decisions. But that's just like one of those small things that like I had never heard about.
Right.
And I went to like a parochial school for like elementary through from kindergarten through 8th grade. Nothing some brought up like, and it's just there's not enough thought that's actually placed on the massive impact religion has had. And I think part of that is because the rise, I don't even use the term atheist, because like atheist I feel like still implies that like you're saying you don't believe in a God but you still have a concept of God. I would use almost the term irreligious, where these entire religious concepts aren't even really thought about.
There's a term for that. It's like not atheism, but it's like it starts with an A as well, I think.
Agnostic?
Right? Is that what it means, or is that what you?
Agnostic is people who are not sure. And I would say again, I would differentiate even from agnostic, because not that, like, agnostic still implies that you've given it thought.
Okay.
Right? Atheist is like you've given it thought and you decided no.
Okay.
And agnostic is like you've thought about it and you're not really sure. Okay. Where I would say irreligiousness probably isn't what the word actually means, but for our uses here today, it'll be individuals who never considered religion at all.
Okay.
And not just in the sense of God, but all those other important thoughts that come from it. So, like, why did people commit murder? And you have, like, the story of, like, resentment from Cain and Abel. Why do people interact and, like, struggle and not know how to communicate with each other? Right? The Tower of Babel. And you're like, really, the point of Tower of Babel is that, like, humanity can accomplish a lot, but because we want to do things our own way, and the way we want to do our own, like, we shape language to fulfill our own aims, has, like, makes that impossible. And you're like, okay, so, like, very useful allegorical stories for explaining ideas that really are nested within the broader thing of religion that if you're irreligious, you just don't think about.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, religion is actually, like, as somebody who's not extremely religious, the history of religion and its influence and everything is kind of crazy. Like, just, it's super interesting. I love it. I love reading about it and just learning about it. Stuff's so fun. Can they hear me? Hello? All right, we might cut that out. Anyway, my little audio cues weren't popping up when I was talking, but we're good now. What was I saying? Oh yeah, just religion in general, like all types of religion, Christianity, Islam, like just the more spiritual, like Buddhism, and I just love reading about it, learning more, because I feel like there's so much meaning, because this kind of goes back to the term the collective consciousness. We have our own individual consciousness, but there is a collective consciousness that everybody shares from everybody else's experience. It's not like I'm in Indiana, Paul's in Chicago, Paul gets punched, and I'm like, oh no, he got punched. It's in my consciousness, right? It's like,
you don't feel those?
No.
Shit.
No, sorry, your voodoo doll's not working. But anyway, just as society goes, I think we all kind of share the same views that we might not have experienced ourselves, just through stuff. And it's crazy, like so many things through not even really established, like current religions. Like you have a lot of Native American, not Native, just Indian in general, some Native American, and just other very old religions, or I guess we'll call it religions, in the past. They all kind of share a lot of things, a lot of imagery.
Yeah.
I was like, you guys are on the other side of the world. There's a lot of similarities here. Like, it's kind of crazy. Like, there's got to be something. I might not be super, like, I know what religion is, right? But in a way, I'm spiritual. Like, there's something else, I think, beyond our either dimensions or realm. I feel like there's something. There has to be.
Oh, yeah. I think so, because I would say, all right, so to use Christianity, because that's the one I'm most versed in, right? My interpretation of the story of the Garden of Eden is the story, and this is my interpretation. I didn't come up with this. There are much smarter people who make this much better. Right. Is that it's really the story of mankind becoming self-aware. And self-awareness, and this one I'm just going to totally bite off Dr. Jordan Peterson, is the idea that I recognize what I'm scared of and what can hurt me. But in that moment, I recognize that Gabe's also a person. And that means Gabe has those same insecurities.
I'm never insecure. Don't listen to him.
Never. Not once. Not even a little.
All right, continue.
He's mad I have a better beard.
False.
In that line of self-awareness, there is, for lack of a better word, there's an alienation that occurs in which you do not fully recognize yourself as yourself. You recognize there's some separation between you and your body, so to speak, right? You're not just the dog who does like what its instincts tell it to do.
Right.
You have the ability to go, well, I could do that, but, right? And I think I think every religion really has a point. Like, so in like Greek mythology, you have Prometheus steals fire to give to mankind, right? Islam obviously still has a Christianity one. I know I know Hinduism also has similar creation stories in which there's some story in which somehow man gets the ability to become self-aware.
Right.
And they all use different allegorical things. Like it was the fruit in the Garden of Eden, it was fire for the Greeks and Romans, it was whatever for the Hindus. But in all of them, there's this idea that man has reached a point where we are now separate from just the animal. I think from there you get a lot of disagreements as to why that happened,
what exactly it is,
what is the soul, because like the Buddhists kind of had the view of the soul. That's actually becoming...
Be careful, I'll get Sasha to fact check you. I'm just kidding, keep going.
I wouldn't mind. Where they view the soul, and at least the individual, as kind of a complete illusion.
Okay, illusion. I was like
illusion.
Yeah.
In reality, like, that isn't to say that you don't have a soul, but to think that your soul is an individual part that is true only to you and is not somehow connected with kind of like the same thing, like a broader collective soul of not just individuals but the whole universe, right? Whereas like Christianity very much says no, you have a soul, that soul is you, right? And that individual is very important to it. In fact, the soul would not exist without the individual, and the individual without the soul. Whereas a lot of times, like Buddhism, at least from my understanding, is actually coming to terms with the fact that the individual soul, as we perceive, is not actually an individual, but a part of a greater whole. But because of those distinctions, like, and again, it doesn't really seem small. All right, we still have a soul, we're still self-aware, but that little distinction of it being an individual versus it being an illusory individual that's part of a bigger collective leads to radically different ways of how people should behave and what virtues they should seek to like go after.
Right.
And there's conflict, at least religious conflict to an extent, happens because there's only so much areas where they both can exist when it comes to like running a society in the same area, right? There are contradictions, and I think one of the things that we've run into with religion is that it still has a very high value, but because then this isn't like a critique or anything, but just as a matter of fact of how multi-ethnic and multicultural the world has become, right? Not just in America, not just Europe, but just like in Japan, there's a whole bunch of people from all over the world who all have their own views. It's become very difficult to create broader societal rules based on religious beliefs, because the end result of enforcing religious or theological beliefs is that's going to you're going to have conflict.
Right. It's like we need the subtle influence, but it can't be direct. It can't be a direct influence. It has to be kind of like a guiding thing, because it's just another thing of like forcing your values. Everybody's going to be different. Not everybody's going to subscribe to the same religion. So when you start forcing values and behaviors on people, that's where problems go. But yeah, like we needed to kind of subtly guide our decision making, and hopefully the one that is the most popular is the one that is also good, right? Because you get a
and so I think this is a difficult conversation about value systems in general, and also one where I'm going to attempt to make an argument that in its own right would be hard to ever validate, which calls into question why would you even bring it up then?
Because mental games are good.
Because mental games are good.
Yep.
And it would seem to me that all human beings are like equal in the sense like on like broad distribution of like populations, right? You're whites, blacks, Asians, right? Like intellectually, if you provided them a similar environment, the average person would perform the same. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But there's no distinctive. On the other hand, it seems to me that value systems, because of the way they, in a sense, train people to behave and give them a set of rules for how to interact with both others and their environment, will lead to radically different successful systems. And as much as Christianity, and I had like a falling out for it, and I'm kind of like rediscovering it again, the system at which Christianity has created for organizing a society seems to have done better than like any other system in the ability for allowing for group cohesion, because like the America is an empire, is a continent spanning empire. We're a country, but like we still have somehow, by being based in the Christian system, have maintained individual liberty over a 4,000-mile expanse in government, right? Whereas you can make the arguments like Confucius and like Eastern thinking has allowed for very stable civilizations for thousands of years. Like China is the most readily and consistently inhabited part of the world for civilizations. But the system that they created, while effective, does not at all really adhere to the inherent value of the individual.
Absolutely not. Yeah.
So you run in, and again, it's very easy to shut this sort of argument down because you just go, well, okay, well, Paul, you grew up in a Christian Western-based society, so of course you have an inherent bias to thinking that this is the correct one,
which is understandable. Everybody's gonna have biases,
right? On the other hand, like even within America, right? This is something about colonization. This may seem a bit off topic, but it'll get back to it, right?
Okay.
There's a big difference between, say, America and Mexico, right? Part of that big reason, it doesn't seem to make sense why America is the wealthier country. Mexico was settled 100 years before us. They had a lot more immigrants come in. At the time when Mexico was being founded, Spain was the global hegemon that had dominated the majority of Europe, had the largest navy by like multiple exponentials the size of every other European nation. Mm-hmm. But you look at the philosophy that guided the colonization. The majority of people who moved to Mexico were single men. The inherent purpose was inherently exploitative. It was to get the raw resources, the gold, the silver, the cash crops, send them back to Europe to be refined. Mm-hmm. Whereas you look at North America, you look at New England and like the Virginia and Pennsylvania colonies, the majority of people who moved there were already established families.
They were fleeing too. They weren't just trying to get resources. They were trying to.
That one's kind of a myth. Like Jamestown.
All right, educate me.
The majority of people who showed up in Jamestown were actually gemsmiths, jewelers, blacksmiths. So there was quite an impression, at least in some of the American colonies, that they could go over there and just exploit the land as the Spanish had done.
Okay.
They ran in and realized there were not any major like continent spanning empires such as the Aztec or the Inca, and they were actually, majority of them died within the first year because they weren't actually farmers. They weren't.
That is true. Yeah, when winter hit.
When winter hit, and they weren't prepared.
Their lives.
And so, because a lot of the American lead, and you can even see this divide even deeper in America, right? And this is something I just finished in a book I was reading. New England, settled families who had a very strong community structure, Puritan to the point where they were witch burning and like kind of Spanish Inquisition-y, even though they were Protestants and were quote unquote fleeing religious persecution. But that's a whole different commentary you can make about slave societies having revolutions and just becoming a different type of slave society. Neither here nor there.
Different podcast.
Whereas like the South, their sort of values were very much like, we're just going to enslave. Like they had this idea of like the Roman and Greek Republic where you had patricians and you had slaves. And so you were either a citizen and like the noble higher born man, or you were a slave. And particularly this took on a racial impetus in America. But it also had a heavy thing where it wasn't just blacks were viewed as subhuman. They were definitely viewed as more subhuman than, say, the peasant rural white folk. But just that whole structure of building society, like the South is rich in natural resources, great farmland, but then the system of ethics and morality they built had made it less competitive eventually of New England, who built families and developing the community for the sake of the community and for the sake of like the community's children so they could build better. So these entire systems that we create, well, yeah, you make the argument that I'm biased onto which the one I was born into, but the one in the system I was born into was one that encourages the formation of families, the formation of the rights of the individual, the formation of private enterprise and private property, which are all really good bulwarks from being exploited by either
the government or other people.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
And I'm like, so you can say they're all relative and you can say it's a bias, but I'm like, also, like, people will abuse people if given the opportunity.
Yeah, that's something if we want to transition. Maybe.
Sure.
I'm not sure. Do you think... I think you and I are going to be in agreement on this, but human beings aren't rational, right? They're irrational. Like...
Yes. I
think it was either... It might have been Dostoevsky. But I forget, or Solzhenitsyn, one of the amazing Russian philosophers, kind of just talked about that men aren't rational beings because if you try to tell us we're a rational being, we're going to purposely be irrational. Like, that's boiling it down a lot. It was like, if we're saying that men, if we want to create a utopia where everything is perfect, man will lash out for trying... What was the analogy? He said, like, men aren't piano keys. You can't just play them.
Right.
Like, they're going to lash out even if it's against their better judgment, just because feeling like a cog in the system is, like, not fulfilling.
Have you ever heard of the French word inu?
No. So
French has a whole bunch of words that only really make sense in French. And inu is one of those words that does not have an English counterpart anywhere near it. But the basic idea is being sick of a good thing. Right? Those moments when your life's going well, everything's going as it should be, like, and you know you're doing what you're supposed to be doing, and you hate it. The
monotony and everything.
Not even that it's monotonous. It's just you're bored, and like you know it's the right thing. You know it's like this is as it should be.
Is it? Do you think like there's nothing to work for, right? There's no new challenge to overcome. You're kind of just everything's going fine. So, or like, why do you think that is?
I think men, and I use men in the more gender term particularly, I would say are primarily beasts of burden. I think there's a certain aspect, so I use a beast of burden to explain that, right? Like horses are animals that you need to put a weight on them and they need to work. Otherwise, they die, then they become depressed, and they don't live healthy lives. Like certain animals, we have literally bred to the point where they are not doing physical labor. They are not being healthy. I would say man is in a similar fashion. I don't think that literally means people need to go pick up heavy things and carry them.
and move. Pick up stones.
Right?
It will make you happy.
To an extent, it does, though. I think like a lot of like the big, like, especially you see on social media and like especially like young men just like going to the gym a lot, is that I think your little monkey brain actually really likes that, and it's beyond just physical work, but the fact that like you are being opposed, there's something working against you that you must overcome, allows for a sense of purpose and accomplishment that you don't get from taking the easy path or a smooth path.
That's true. I agree. I feel like there's, like you said, we need something to overcome to just keep us going. As funny as that sounds, like a utopia may not be like a utopia for some people.
Oh, right. Because there's that human aspect to and you see a lot of times like it's like one of those like stupid tropes in like alien invasion movies where it's like against all the odds, like or like war, or even like war movies, and they're always kind of sappy and they're like, why are you fighting? Why won't you just give up? And it's like that notion like I'm doing it for my family, or I'm doing it for freedom, or I'm doing it for something beyond yourself.
Mm-hmm.
In which like, yeah, you know what, you're offering me a very good thing, but seeing as I don't have to do anything for it, you don't get that sense of ownership.
Yeah, that's true. How did we get on this topic again? I forgot. I mean, it's not a bad topic, but I was just thinking. I was like, wait, were we supposed to connect this into something?
Systems of morality, value systems.
Right. I feel like we transitioned. I don't know. It doesn't matter. It's just good talk anyway. But yeah, I don't know. I love considering all these things. I mean, we'll never find the right answer. We'll never find an answer everybody agrees on.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that's the fun in it. Oh yeah, go ahead.
So this was actually something that I was talking to my mutual buddy Matt the other day, and I think this is, and I haven't really seen this talked about a lot, but a useful way of conceptualizing information. So I want everyone to kind of like imagine the light spectrum, okay, right? And you have television rays on one end, and then you have gamma rays on the other.
Uh-huh.
Human beings see visible light, which is a really small spectrum.
Yeah.
Granted, within that small spectrum, there is an infinite amount of variability.
Uh-huh.
Right? There is an infinite amount of shades of colors and slight, minute differences that you can make between each one. I think systems of value and the way they should be conceptualized exist in a very similar sort of representation, where you have every possible value system makes up the whole spectrum. I would say there are a set of better options that exist in a similar fashion in the same way the visible light spectrum exists in the broader electromagnetic spectrum. Right? So within, like, say there's like certain values, and these values can contradict, right? Because like individualism is important, but still is like a collectivism or a communitarianism, where you're like, yeah, you got to sacrifice what you do for yourself for the good of, say, your family or for your community, for your country, right? And you have also things like freedom of speech, because it's really important that you can express your ideas. On the other hand, like, you shouldn't just be a dickhead and purposely say things to hurt people. Not even necessarily for the argument that it's bad, but because it's not effective. And so when I use that idea that there's a spectrum unless good ideas exist, I don't mean that as like a moral argument, but as in like these allow for effective, successful societies. Right? And I think within that spectrum, much like the visible light, you can have an infinite amount of variability while also getting rid of like a greater infinite amount of like bad ideas. So like I find frustrating when things like, oh, everyone has a different perspective. Like everyone's perspective is useful. I'm like, no, because like, and then again, I'm not making a claim that I know exactly where those lines are that would divide up the spectrum.
We're just raging against postmodern thinking.
Honestly, is it art? No, it isn't. It hasn't been art since neoclassicalism.
I don't know if I maybe used this improperly, but I think one of the what did I just say? The
postmodern thinking?
Postmodern. Yeah. You said neo, and I was like, neo-modern? That's not it. But postmodern. Something that I thought I heard, or just postmodern is very broad. It can be applied to all aspects. But one of the things it has, I think, recently been applied to is validating everybody's idea as equal.
Yeah, no.
Because it's their experience. I'm sorry, no.
Oh, yeah.
That's
and here's the thing. What gets me is that, but there's also a weird thing where there are a lot of times there's a refusal to call a spade a spade. Like, no, I'm triggered now.
Okay. Well, all right, we won't go.
No, you're fine.
Yeah.
No, like.
Another conversation for
a different podcast. I guess real quickly, yes, obviously the way you view yourself is important. On the other hand, like, So, and this goes less. Then here's the thing. I do not blame individuals who can get what they want by simply claiming this is how they see it and therefore you should see it too. I actually have zero malice towards them because I do not view them responsible for the ensuing societal ills that befell like that sort of thinking. The real issue is that individuals have lost the capability in a lot of ways to go, I simply do not care. Right? So if an individual, right, wants to say, I won't give a specific example because I don't want to step on anyone's toes. It doesn't really matter. You can use your imagination, maybe attack helicopters if you get the reference. Demonetized.
Continue.
Personally, I do not care if you think that. That is your prerogative.
Yep.
And I do not think I have the right to tell you how you should view yourself and force it upon you in the same way I expect the same to be extended to me. On the other hand, I do not need to validate that. That doesn't mean I have a right to force you to think otherwise, but that does also mean I do not have to agree with you and I can simply go, no.
Right, yeah, that's like, at the end of the day, that's one of the big problems. It's like people, I feel like, do not understand that you can agree to disagree and that's okay. As long as you respect each other, respect opinions, understand that you're not going to be on the same side on this issue, but I'm still going to be your friend because I know you're not a horrible person, right? Like, we don't do that anymore. It's kind of scary.
Well, and I'm not saying this just to undermine what you just said, but I think there's a point where, like, I don't need everyone to be my friend.
No, yeah.
Right, you know what I'm saying? And again, that doesn't, because I think there's a lot of times it becomes a very black and white. I think, well, if you're not my friend, then you're my enemy. Like, no, like, I don't want to eat with you. On the other hand, I don't want to see you starve. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't want you sitting at my table. But if you're at your own table doing your own thing,
do you?
Right. And, like, one slightly related, and this is just a general statement. If someone makes eye contact with you and nods and, like, it is acknowledging your presence, you are obligated as a person to also acknowledge their presence. That is all. Speak when you're spoken to.
That's probably some great wisdom to end off on. I think we had a good conversation. We really talked about a lot of morality, history, philosophy, and like we're kind of transitioning into like sort of postmodern stuff, which is a great topic, but I don't know if we really have the time today. The sun is going down. I'm not sure how the exposure has changed from start to finish, but this was a good hour-plus conversation. I want to thank Paul so much for hopping on here. I hope y'all enjoyed and you stayed to the end. And yeah, let me know what you guys want me to talk about or research. If not, I'm just going to keep doing random stuff that I find interesting. I know another buddy of mine, Matt, he was like, Paul's doing a podcast with you? I'm not there. Bro, I'm driving down next weekend. We're going to do it. Now, he's not coming down because I'm not going to be here next weekend. But we got plenty. I know. We got plenty of people who are interested, and I love the support so far. I know some of my girlfriend's friends are like, yo, when's Gabe's podcast coming up? Like, I was like, oh, people be asking about this.
You have a girlfriend?
No, if you couldn't tell. You obviously didn't watch my second most recent podcast, Paul. Thank you very much. That's where I introduced my girlfriend. Anyway, but yeah, all right. Enjoy your night, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll see you soon.